Millionaire humiliates disabled waitress in upscale restaurant, sparking outrage. The waitress's response leaves everyone speechless. Cassie Ross was jolted awake by the shrill sound of her alarm clock, pulling her from a recurring nightmare. Cold sweat trickled down her forehead as the images of the accident slowly faded. The twisted metals screech, the smell of burning rubber, and the muffled screams still echoed in her mind. Taking a deep breath, she sat up in bed, her hand instinctively reaching for the prosthetic leg propped against the nightstand. Another day, Cassie murmured to herself, attaching the prosthetic to her right leg with the ease born from years of practice. The metal's cold touch against her skin was a constant reminder of what she had lost and what she still struggled to overcome. At 25, Cassie bore the weight of the world on her shoulders. The mirror reflected a young woman with brown hair and determined, yet tired, green eyes. Deep circles under her eyes were silent witnesses to sleepless nights and exhausting days. Her uniform for Starlight, Manhattan's most elegant restaurant, hanging in the closet, reminded her of her current reality. As she got ready, Cassie couldn't help but glance at the photo of her parents on the dresser. The cracked glass of the frame was another painful reminder of that fateful night. "I miss you," she whispered, the pain of loss still fresh even after 7 years. Her fingers traced the smiling faces in the photo, a sad smile playing on her lips as she remembered happier times that now seemed so distant. The journey to Starlight was a daily test of perseverance. Every step on New York's busy sidewalks was a reminder of how much her life had changed. People rushed past, some casting curious glances at her leg, others looking away uncomfortably. Cassie had learned to ignore most of them, but occasionally, a whispered comment or a pitying look cut like a knife. "Hey, Cassie!" Tom, the doorman at Starlight, called out as she arrived. His warm smile was one of the few things that made her days bearable. "How are you today?" Cassie forced a smile, grateful for the familiarity. "Surviving, Tom, as always." "You're stronger than you think, girl," Tom replied, giving her an encouraging wink. "Show them what you're made of." In the locker room, Cassie met her colleague and friend, Sarah. Sarah's normally cheerful face was marred by concern, and Cassie's stomach sank, anticipating bad news. "Cassie, you won't believe this," Sarah said, her eyes wide with worry. "I overheard the managers talking. It looks like the restaurant might be sold." Cassie's heart sank. The news hit her like a punch to the stomach. "Sold? But they can't do that. This job is all I have." Her mind began racing, imagining increasingly worse scenarios. Without this job, how would she pay rent? How would she continue her studies? Sarah placed a comforting hand on Cassie's shoulder. "I know. And there's more. You received another letter from the university. It's at your station." With trembling hands, Cassie opened the envelope. Her eyes scanned the lines, panic growing with each word read. Her face paled as she comprehended the content. No, she murmured, collapsing onto a nearby bench, the crumpled letter in her hands. "What is it?" Sarah asked, her voice laden with concern. Cassie looked at her friend, tears in her eyes, her voice nearly failing. "They're going to cancel my scholarship. If I don't get the money by the end of the month, I'll lose everything." The reality of the situation hit her hard. Years of effort, sleepless nights studying, all the sacrifices she had made. It could all be in vain. Sarah hugged her, trying to offer some comfort. "Oh, Cassie, there must be something we can do. Maybe we can talk to the director, explain your situation?" Cassie shook her head, wiping away tears furiously. "You don't understand, Sarah. I've extended all the deadlines I could. This is my last chance." The sound of raised voices from the main hall interrupted the moment. Cassie quickly wiped away her tears and stood up, straightening her uniform with trembling hands. "Time to work," she said, forcing herself to straighten her shoulders. "I can't lose this job, not now." Sarah watched her with concern. "Cassie, are you sure you're in any condition to work today?" Cassie nodded, her face a mask of determination. "I don't have a choice, do I? Every penny counts now." As Cassie left the locker room, she had no idea that her worst nightmare was about to become reality. The day that had started badly was about to turn into a waking nightmare, one that would test every fiber of her being and force her to confront not just her past, but also her uncertain future. The buzz at Starlight reached a new crescendo as Olivia Rothschild made her triumphant entrance. The sound of her designer heels echoed on the marble floor, heralding her arrival even before she was seen. The air seemed to thicken, laden with tension and anticipation. Cassie, busy cleaning a table near the entrance, froze upon recognizing that authoritative voice. It was a voice she had heard only once before, 7 years ago, in a packed courtroom. Slowly, she turned around, her heart racing, a buzzing in her ears muffling the sounds around her. There she was. Olivia Rothschild, CEO of the company responsible for the accident that had devastated Cassie's life. Tall, impeccably dressed in a Chanel suit, diamonds twinkling on her fingers and ears, Olivia was the epitome of power and arrogance. Her platinum blonde hair was pulled back into a severe bun, highlighting her sharp features and calculating gaze. "Charles, darling," Olivia exclaimed, air-kissing near the cheeks of the restaurant manager. Her smile didn't reach her cold eyes. "I'm so thrilled to celebrate our latest acquisition. Starlight will be a perfect gem in the Rothschild Industries portfolio." Cassie's stomach churned. So the rumors were true. The restaurant had been sold, and to the last person in the world she wanted to see as her boss. Her hands trembled as she tried to continue her work, praying to go unnoticed. "Miss Rothschild?" Charles responded, visibly nervous, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. "Your table is ready. Right this way, please." As the group passed, Cassie lowered her head, her whole body tense as if bracing for a blow. But fate had other plans. "You there!" Olivia snapped her fingers in Cassie's direction, the sound cutting through the air like a whip. "Bring me a glass of champagne. Dom Perignon, nothing less." Cassie took a deep breath, forcing herself to move. Each step towards the bar was a battle against the urge to flee, to hide, to disappear. The sound of her prosthetic, usually imperceptible, seemed deafening to her at that moment. "Hey," whispered Jake the chef as Cassie reached the bar. His brown eyes were full of concern. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Cassie shook her head, unable to speak. Her hands trembled as she picked up the champagne glass, the cold crystal against her warm, clammy skin. Back at Olivia's table, Cassie overheard snippets of conversation that made her blood run cold. Olivia spoke loudly, unconcerned with who might hear, her voice dripping with arrogance and disdain. "And with the closing of that obsolete factory, our profits will skyrocket." Olivia laughed, raising her glass in a morbid toast. "Who cares about a few hundred unemployed when we have millions to earn? That's how business is done, my dears." The glass in Cassie's hand wobbled dangerously. Closed factory? Hundreds unemployed? Her mind raced to her younger brother, who worked at a local factory. Could it be? "Careful there, waitress," Olivia said, her icy blue eyes finally focusing on Cassie. They swept over Cassie from top to bottom, assessing her as if she were defective merchandise. "That champagne costs more than you probably make in a month. It would be a shame to waste it, wouldn't it?" Cassie felt Olivia's gaze linger on her leg. A cruel smile formed on the executive's blood-red lips. "Well, well," Olivia murmured, leaning forward, her expensive perfume invading Cassie's nostrils. "How interesting. Tell me, dear, does your condition interfere with your work? It must be difficult balancing trays on one leg, isn't it?" The room seemed to fall silent. Cassie could feel every eye on her, some pitying, others morbidly curious. Her face burned with shame and contained rage. "No, ma'am," Cassie replied, her voice trembling as she fought to maintain her composure. "I do my job as well as anyone else." Olivia laughed, a cold, humorless sound that echoed through the hall. "Fascinating. Charles, you should get an award for charity. Employing the less fortunate, what a touch. Perhaps we should make a commercial." Starlight, where even the broken can serve. Cassie felt her face burn with humiliation. She wanted to scream, to throw the champagne in Olivia's perfectly made-up face. She wanted to tell everyone there who Olivia Rothschild really was and what her company had done. But the fear of losing her job, of losing everything, kept her paralyzed. "May I bring anything else, ma'am?" Cassie asked, her voice almost a whisper, her knuckles white from gripping the tray too hard. "No, that will be all." Olivia dismissed her with a disdainful wave of her ring-covered hand. "You can limp back to your corner now. Oh, and dear," she added, her smile widening cruelly, "try not to trip on the way. I would hate to see you fall again." The words struck Cassie like a slap. The insinuation was clear, cruel, and deliberate. Olivia knew exactly who she was. Cassie stepped back, the laughter from Olivia's table echoing in her ears like knives. She barely made it to the kitchen before the first tears fell, hot and bitter, streaming down her cheeks. "Cassie?" Jake's concerned voice sounded behind her. "What happened out there? You're shaking." She turned, finding the compassionate gaze of the chef. Jake had always been kind to her, one of the few bright spots in her gloomy days at Starlight. "Jake, I can't do this. That woman, she..." Before she could finish, the sound of breaking glass came from the hall, followed by furious shouts that sliced through the air like a razor. "Incompetent!" Olivia's voice boomed, laden with fury. "Do you have any idea how much this dress costs? It's more than you'd make in a lifetime of work in this miserable place." Cassie and Jake rushed back to the hall, only to see a scene of chaos. Olivia stood, champagne dripping down her designer dress, her face twisted in a mask of rage. A young waiter, barely older than a teenager, trembled before her, looking small and frightened in the face of Olivia's fury. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," the waiter stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "It was an accident. I didn't mean to. Please, I can't lose this job. My family depends on me." "You're fired!" Olivia shouted, her voice echoing through the now silent hall. She turned to Charles, who looked ready to faint. "Fire him now, or I'll sue this establishment into bankruptcy. You have no idea who you're dealing with." Cassie looked at the young waiter, recognizing the fear in his eyes. It was the same fear she felt, the same desperation. In that moment, something inside her broke. Years of repressed anger, silenced injustice, unrecognized pain, all came flooding out. "Enough!" Cassie murmured, stepping forward. All eyes turned to her, the silence in the hall so dense you could hear a pin drop. "What did you say?" Olivia hissed, her eyes sparking with rage, focusing on Cassie like a predator about to strike. Cassie took a deep breath, lifting her chin. The fear was still there, making her heart race. But now there was something else. Determination. "I said enough, Mrs. Rothschild. It's time someone told you some truths." The silence that followed was deafening. The customers, the staff, everyone seemed to hold their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Olivia, for a moment, seemed stunned by Cassie's audacity. "How dare you speak to me that way?" Olivia quickly recovered, her voice low and dangerous. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Cassie took another step forward, ignoring Charles's pleading look. "I know exactly who you are, Mrs. Rothschild, and that's why I can't stay silent." She turned to the young waiter, still trembling. "Go back to the kitchen. You're not losing your job today." The waiter hesitated for a moment, but a reassuring nod from Jake made him move. "This is unacceptable!" Olivia shouted, her face turning red with rage. "Charles, fire this girl immediately!" Charles stepped forward, stammering. "Miss Ross, please don't do this. Think about your job." Cassie shook her head, a sad smile on her lips. "Sorry, Mr. Charles, but there are things more important than a job." She turned to Olivia. "You remember me, don't you? 7 years ago, New York courthouse. I was there when your company was acquitted for lack of evidence." Olivia's eyes narrowed, a flicker of recognition passing through them. "Ah, yes, the accident girl. I see you managed to get up. Well, sort of." The cruelty of those words made several customers gasp, shocked. Cassie felt tears burn her eyes, but she held them back. "Yes, I got up. Despite everything your company did, or rather, didn't do. Despite losing my leg, my parents, and almost losing my hope." Cassie's voice trembled, but she continued. "And now, here you are, closing factories, destroying lives, all for a few more millions that you don't even need." Olivia laughed, but the sound was cold, humorless. "Business is business, dear. The world doesn't stop just because some people can't keep up." "No," Cassie replied, her voice gaining strength. "The world doesn't stop. But it also doesn't revolve around people like you, Mrs. Rothschild. People who think they can trample over others just because they have money and power." Cassie looked around, at the shocked and fascinated faces of the customers and co-workers. "All of you here. You admire people like her? Rich, powerful, successful. But at what cost does this success come? How many lives are destroyed along the way?" "This is ridiculous," Olivia scoffed, but there was a hint of nervousness in her voice now. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Cassie challenged. "Then tell me, Mrs. Rothschild, how many jobs will be lost with the closing of that factory? How many families will be without income? How many dreams will be destroyed? The hall was completely silent now, all eyes shifting between Cassie and Olivia. The tension was palpable, electric. Olivia began, but for the first time, she seemed at a loss for words. Cassie took another step forward, her voice now calm, almost gentle. You know, Mrs. Rothschild, I spent years hating you and your company for what you did to me. But now I just feel sorry. Sorry for someone who has so much, yet still needs to step on others to feel powerful. The words hung in the air, heavy and emotion-laden. For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. It was as if time had stopped. Then, slowly, someone began to clap. Soon, others joined in, and within seconds, the entire hall was applauding. Cassie blinked, surprised, as she saw tears in the eyes of some customers, expressions of admiration in others. The silence that followed Cassie's words was shattered by the sound of slow, sarcastic clapping. Olivia Rothschild, recovering from the initial shock, stepped forward, her cold eyes fixed on Cassie. "Bravo, Miss Ross! What a touching speech," Olivia said, her voice dripping with disdain. "But do you really think your pretty words change anything in the real world? You have no idea how business works." Cassie felt the gaze of everyone in the restaurant on her. Her heart pounded, but she stood her ground. "Maybe I don't know everything about business, Mrs. Rothschild, but I know the difference between right and wrong. And what your company does. It's wrong," Olivia laughed, a cold sound that echoed through the hall. "Right and wrong? We're talking about business, dear, not a fairy tale. The world belongs to the strong, to those brave enough to do what is necessary to succeed. Even if it means destroying lives?" Cassie countered, her voice gaining strength. "Like my families? Like the hundreds of families who depend on that factory you plan to close?" A murmur ran through the hall. Some customers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Others seemed genuinely interested in the confrontation unfolding before them. Olivia narrowed her eyes, her posture subtly shifting. "Be careful what you say, girl. You're treading on dangerous ground. Baseless accusations can have serious consequences." "They're not baseless when I've lived those consequences," Cassie responded, her voice trembling slightly. "When I lost my leg, my parents, my future because of your company's negligence." Olivia's face paled for a moment, but she quickly recomposed herself. "That was a regrettable accident. The courts have already decided there was no fault on our part." "Justice?" Cassie let out a bitter laugh. "The only justice that was served was the kind that Rothschild Industries' money could buy." The sound of something breaking interrupted the confrontation. A customer had dropped their glass, the liquid spreading across the white tablecloth. Olivia took advantage of the distraction to regain her composure. She turned to Charles, who watched the scene with a mix of horror and fascination. "This is unacceptable. I demand that this employee be fired immediately. Otherwise, forget any dealings with Rothschild Industries." Charles hesitated, his gaze shifting between Olivia and Cassie. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his decision. It was at that moment that Jake stepped forward, positioning himself next to Cassie. "If Cassie goes, I go too," he declared, his voice firm. "And me?" said Sarah, joining them. One by one, other employees approached, forming a small group around Cassie. The gesture of solidarity seemed to catch Olivia off guard. Charles cleared his throat, adjusting his tie nervously. "Mrs. Rothschild, perhaps we can discuss this privately. I'm sure we can come to an arrangement that—" "There's nothing to discuss," Olivia interrupted, her voice cutting. She grabbed her purse, casting an icy glance at Cassie. "You have no idea what you've just done, girl. This won't end here." With those words, Olivia headed for the exit, the sound of her heels echoing through the silent hall. The door closed behind her with a dull thud, leaving a vacuum of tension in the air. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then, slowly, the buzz of conversations began to fill the room again. Some customers clapped discreetly, others seemed uncomfortable with the scene they had just witnessed. Cassie felt her legs weaken, the adrenaline from the confrontation starting to ebb. Jake held her arm, guiding her gently to a chair. "Are you okay?" he asked, concern evident in his eyes. Cassie nodded, still dazed by what had just happened. I don't know what came over me. I just couldn't stay silent." Sarah approached, offering a glass of water. "You were incredible, Cassie. Scary, but incredible." Charles joined the group, his face a mask of concern. "Miss Ross, Well, that was quite unexpected." Cassie looked at him, bracing for the worst. "I understand if you need to fire me, Mr. Charles. I've put the restaurant in a difficult position and—" Charles raised his hand, interrupting her. "I won't lie, the situation is complicated. But what you did? Well, let's just say it made me think about a lot of things." He paused, looking around at the employees gathered. "I think we all have a lot to discuss. For now, back to work. Cassie, I would like to talk to you in my office tomorrow." As Charles walked away, Cassie exchanged glances with Jake and Sarah. The reality of what had happened was beginning to settle. "What have I done?" she murmured, the magnitude of her actions finally hitting her. Jake squeezed her shoulder gently. "You did what many wish they had the courage to do. Now, let's face whatever comes together." Cassie nodded, grateful for the support. As she stood up to return to work, she couldn't help but notice the looks from the customers. Some were admiring, others curious, and some seemed evaluative, as if they were seeing Cassie for the first time. The rest of the night passed in a blur of activity. Cassie worked mechanically, her mind replaying the confrontation with Olivia over and over. Each time the restaurant door opened, she tensed, half expecting Olivia to return with lawyers or the police. When she finally arrived home, Cassie collapsed onto her bed, physically and emotionally exhausted. Her phone vibrated with a message from Jake. "You were incredible today. No matter what happens, we're with you. Rest up, tomorrow is a new day." Cassie smiled weakly, grateful for the support. But as sleep enveloped her, she couldn't help but wonder, what would tomorrow bring? And what consequences would her bravery have? Not just for her, but for everyone around her. With these turbulent thoughts, Cassie finally fell asleep, unaware that her actions that night had set in motion events that would change not just her life, but the lives of many others. The morning after the confrontation with Olivia Rothschild, Cassie entered Starlight with her heart in her throat. The silence that fell over the restaurant as she passed through the door was deafening. "Cassie!" Sarah ran up to her, giving her a tight hug. "You won't believe what's happening." Before Cassie could ask, Charles emerged from his office. "Miss Ross, a word, please." In the office, Charles looked tired, but there was a different sparkle in his eyes. "Cassie, what happened yesterday?" "Well, let's just say it caused more than a little stir." He slid a tablet across the table. On the screen, a video of the confrontation with Olivia was going viral on social media. Comments supporting Cassie flooded the comments section. "Apparently we've become the talk of the town," Charles continued. "Reservations have tripled, but..." Cassie felt her stomach sink. "But? Rothschild Industries is threatening to sue. Olivia is claiming defamation." Cassie closed her eyes, the reality of the situation hitting her hard. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Charles. I never meant to cause trouble for the restaurant." To her surprise, Charles smiled slightly. "Trouble? Cassie, you may have saved this place. And more importantly, you've reminded us why we got into this business in the first place. To serve people, not profits." Leaving the office, Cassie was greeted by a round of applause from her colleagues. Jake approached, holding a newspaper. "You need to see this," he said, pointing to a headline. "Local factory closes. Hundreds lose jobs." Cassie read the article, her heart heavy. The factory Olivia had mentioned was real, and the impact was devastating. "My brother worked there," a voice said. Cassie turned to see Marco, one of the waiters, with tears in his eyes. "Thank you for saying something. Someone needed to." Throughout the day, customers came in not just to eat, but to express their support. Some shared their own stories of corporate injustice. At the end of the shift, exhausted but determined, Cassie knew this was just the beginning. What had started as a moment of courage had transformed into something bigger. As she was closing the restaurant, her phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. "Impressive what you've done. We can help each other. Meet me tomorrow." Cassie stared at the message, a mix of apprehension and curiosity forming. Who could it be? And what would this mean for her fight against Rothschild Industries? Emily arrived at the designated spot, a small cafe a few blocks from Starlight. Her heart raced, uncertain of what to expect. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, but did little to calm her nerves. Her eyes scanned the place, looking for someone who might be her mysterious contact. Sitting in a discreet corner, a middle-aged woman waved at her. Emily hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath and approached. "Emily Parker?" The woman extended her hand, her grip firm and professional. I'm Rebecca Winters, former attorney for Rothschild Industries. Emily sat down, surprised. Former attorney? Rebecca smiled sadly, lines of worry marking her face. Let's just say I had my own ethical awakening. Your confrontation with Olivia, well, it was the last straw. Emily studied Rebecca intently. There was tension in her shoulders, fatigue in her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and tough decisions. Why did you want to meet me? Emily asked, her voice low, aware of the other customers around. Rebecca looked around before leaning forward. Because you did something many of us should have done a long time ago. You stood up to Olivia, you exposed the truth. And now we have a chance to do something about it. As Rebecca spoke, Emily felt a mix of hope and apprehension grow within her. The former lawyer revealed internal documents, evidence of questionable practices at Rothschild Industries. Each word was like a knife, stirring painful memories Emily had fought to bury. The accident that took your leg and your parents, Rebecca said softly, placing a folder on the table. It wasn't the first, nor the last. The company has a history of cutting corners on safety. Emily closed her eyes, the memories flooding her mind. The sound of twisted metal, the smell of burning rubber, the screams. She swallowed hard, fighting back tears. I always knew there was more to it, Emily whispered, her voice trembling. Rebecca placed her hand over Emily's, the gesture surprisingly comforting. Your bravery in facing Olivia. It inspired others to come forward. Former employees, affected families. We're building a case. A case? Emily asked, suddenly feeling overwhelmed. The idea of reliving everything, of exposing her pain to the world, was terrifying. A class action lawsuit against Rothschild Industries, Rebecca explained, her eyes shining with determination. But we need you, Emily. Your story, your testimony, could be crucial. Emily hesitated, considering the implications. Does this mean reliving everything? Rebecca nodded understandingly. It won't be easy. There will be depositions, possibly a trial. You'll have to tell your story, face Olivia again. But think of the lives we can change, the families we can help. Silence fell between them, heavy with the weight of the decision. Emily looked out the cafe window, watching people pass by, oblivious to the drama unfolding inside. How many of them, she wondered, also carried invisible wounds caused by corporate greed? Tell me more, Emily finally said, turning back to Rebecca. About the other cases, the other families. Rebecca opened the folder, spreading photos and documents across the table. Emily saw faces, names, stories of lives destroyed by negligence. Each case was a stab to the heart, a reminder that her tragedy was not unique. This is Michael Thompson. Rebecca pointed to a photo of a smiling man. Lost his arm in a factory accident. The company claimed he didn't follow safety protocols, but in reality, the equipment was faulty. Emily felt a surge of anger rise within her. And they got away with it? Rebecca nodded grimly. Confidential settlements, bribes, intimidation. Rothschild has many tricks up its sleeve. As they talked, Emily shared more about the accident, details she had deeply buried. The sound of failing brakes, her mother's scream, the devastating impact. Rebecca listened intently, occasionally making notes, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Emily, Rebecca said finally, her voice laden with emotion. What Rothschild did, it's more than negligence. It's criminal. With your help, we can not only win compensation for the victims, but also force real changes in the industry. Emily took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision. Participating would mean exposing herself, reliving traumas, possibly facing retaliation. But it was also a chance to seek justice, not just for herself, but for everyone affected by Rothschild's practices. If I do this, Emily said slowly, her voice gaining strength, I want assurances that the factory workers will also be helped. It's not just about the past, it's about the future too. Rebecca smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her tired face. That's exactly the attitude we need. Together, we can make a difference. Emily extended her hand, picking up one of the photos. It was of a family, smiles frozen in time, unaware of the tragedy awaiting them. She traced the faces with her finger, feeling a deep connection to these people she had never met. Okay, Emily said, her voice low but firm. I'll do it. For them, for me, for everyone Rothschild has hurt. Rebecca squeezed Emily's hand. gratitude evident in her eyes. "It won't be easy, Emily. Olivia and Rothschild will fight tooth and nail. They have resources, power, influence." Emily nodded, a fierce determination taking hold of her. "And we have the truth. And I believe that, in the end, that will be more powerful than any money or connections they have." The two women spent the next hours discussing strategies, reviewing documents, preparing for the battle ahead. The cafe around them emptied and filled again, the world continuing its routine while, in that corner, a revolution was being planned. As Emily left the cafe, she felt like she was on the edge of a precipice. The path ahead was scary, filled with uncertainties and potential dangers. But it was also full of possibilities, hope for a better future. Her phone vibrated, a message from Jake. "Hey, is everything okay? You seem distracted today." Emily smiled, grateful for the constant support of her friend. She hesitated for a moment, considering how much to reveal. Finally, she replied, "I'm fine. Actually, better than fine. I think I've finally found a way to make a real difference." With a mix of determination and apprehension, Emily headed towards Starlight. The familiar sign of the restaurant shone in the night, a beacon of normalcy in a world that, for Emily, had just turned upside down. As she walked, she thought about all the lives affected by Rothschild Industries, about all the untold stories, the uncorrected injustices. And for the first time in a long time, Emily felt something beyond the pain and anger that had been her constant companions since the accident. She felt hope. The decisions she would make in the coming days could change not just her life, but the lives of many others. The real fight was just beginning, and Emily was ready to face it head-on. With each step towards Starlight, Emily felt her resolve strengthen. The weight of the documents in her bag, the stories she had heard, the promises she had made, all propelled her forward. The battle against Rothschild would be tough, perhaps the toughest thing she had ever done. But Emily knew, deep in her heart, that it was the right thing to do. And with that certainty, she opened the door to Starlight, ready to face whatever the future held. Cassie walked into Charles's office, a folder under her arm and determination in her eyes. In the 2 weeks since her meeting with Rebecca, she had worked tirelessly on a proposal for Starlight. "Mr. Charles," she began, "I have some ideas to improve the restaurant." Charles raised an eyebrow, curious. "Go on, Miss Ross." Cassie opened the folder, revealing spreadsheets and charts. "We can cut costs without sacrificing quality by implementing a zero-waste program. Additionally, I suggest partnering with local producers affected by the factory closure." As she explained, Charles's eyes widened. "This is impressive, Cassie. Where did you learn all this? Remember the college I'm struggling to finish? Business administration?" She smiled shyly. Charles was about to respond when his phone rang. His expression changed as he answered. "Mrs. Rothschild, what a surprise." Cassie froze. Olivia's furious voice was audible on the other end. "Charles, I'm on my way. This nonsense ends today." When the call ended, Charles looked pale. "Cassie, perhaps it's best if you leave." But Cassie stood firm. "No, Mr. Charles, no more running." Minutes later, Olivia burst through the restaurant, followed by 2 men in suits. "The game is over," she hissed. "Charles, sign these papers. I'm taking full control of Starlight." Cassie stepped forward. "Mrs. Rothschild, before you do something drastic, perhaps you'd like to see this." She extended her proposal. Olivia laughed dismissively, but something in the numbers made her pause. "This is interesting, but irrelevant. I have control now." That's when Jake entered, followed by a local TV crew. "Actually," he smiled, "I think everyone would like to hear about the practices of Rothschild Industries." Olivia paled. "You wouldn't dare." Cassie felt the weight of the decision. Exposing Olivia live could ensure justice, but might also destroy the lives of innocent employees at the company. "Mrs. Rothschild," Cassie said calmly, "we can do this the hard way, or we can work together for real change." For a moment, the air was thick with tension. Then, surprisingly, Olivia lowered her shoulders. "Perhaps we can talk in private," she murmured. As Cassie followed Olivia to the office, she exchanged a look with Jake. This was not the end, but the beginning of a new battle, one in which compassion could be as powerful as confrontation. Starlight was unrecognizable. Tables had been moved aside, making room for makeshift booths. Cassie circulated the space, checking the last details of the job fair she had organized. "Cassie!" Jake called out, waving from one of the booths. "The first candidates are arriving." In the weeks following her private conversation with Olivia, Cassie had worked tirelessly. The proposal for Starlight was not enough. She wanted to do more for the community affected by the factory's closure. The job fair was just the beginning. Cassie had convinced local businesses to participate, offering opportunities to the unemployed workers. Under her guidance, Starlight was leading by example, hiring and training several former factory employees. As she assisted a nervous candidate with his resume, Cassie saw a familiar figure enter the restaurant. Olivia Rothschild, looking less imposing than the last time, surveyed the room with a complex expression. Cassie approached her, tense. "Mrs. Rothschild, I didn't expect to see you here," Olivia sighed. "Neither did I, to be honest." She paused, seemingly struggling with her words. "You did a good job here, Cassie." Before Cassie could respond, a buzz spread through the hall. Rebecca Winters had arrived, accompanied by reporters. "Cassie," Rebecca called out, "it's time. Shall we make the announcement?" Cassie felt the weight of the moment. The deal they had negotiated with Rothschild Industries' compensation for the victims, new safety standards, a fund for worker retraining, was about to go public. Looking at Olivia, Cassie saw not an enemy, but someone who, perhaps for the first time, was facing the consequences of her actions. "Mrs. Rothschild," Cassie said softly, "would you like to join us for the announcement?" Olivia appeared surprised, but nodded slowly. As they walked together to the makeshift stage, Cassie reflected on her journey. From despair to hope, from anger to understanding. She had learned that true change comes not only from confrontation, but also from collaboration. Taking a deep breath, Cassie stepped onto the stage, ready to announce not just a victory, but the beginning of a new era of corporate responsibility and community support. A year had passed since the job fair at Starlight. Cassie, dressed in an elegant suit, observed the crowded restaurant with a smile of satisfaction. Starlight had transformed. It was no longer just a luxury restaurant, but a symbol of change and hope in the community. The walls displayed local art, the menu highlighted ingredients from regional producers, and the staff was a diverse mix of veterans and new talents. "Pensive?" Jake asked, joining her. Cassie smiled. "Just reflecting on how much has changed. The agreement with Rothschild Industries was just the beginning." Cassie used her new platform to advocate for broader changes in the industry. The retraining fund had helped hundreds of workers find new careers. Charles approached, accompanied by a visibly transformed Olivia Rothschild. "Cassie, I think it's time for your speech." As she walked to the small stage, Cassie saw familiar faces in the crowd. Rebecca, now a partner in her advocacy efforts. Marco, who had become the assistant chef. Sarah, the HR manager, responsible for the restaurant's inclusion program. "A year ago," Cassie began, her voice firm, "we were in a moment of crisis. Today, we celebrate not just our recovery, but our evolution." She spoke about resilience, compassion, and the importance of community. About how adversities can become opportunities for growth. "This is not the end of our journey," she concluded, "but a new beginning. Together, we will continue to build a future where business and community thrive side by side." Applause echoed through Starlight. Cassie stepped down from the stage, feeling grateful and determined. She knew new challenges would come, but now she had the confidence and support to face them. As the night progressed, Cassie allowed herself a moment of reflection. Her journey had been tough, but each obstacle had made her stronger. The future, once uncertain, now shone with possibilities. We've reached the end of this thrilling journey, but the adventure doesn't have to stop here. If you were intrigued by this story, don't miss the chance to join our community of storytellers and story lovers.